I got it.
Thank you. All right, good deal. All right, well, hello, welcome. We're excited to see you this evening for another wonderful session of Dessert in a Movie as part of the library's retirement boot camp program. I'm Kathleen Morgan from the library, and I'm here with our illustrious retirement boot camp drill sergeant, Jack Altman. So first of all, I want to give a shout out to our series sponsor. This whole retirement bootcamp series is sponsored by Capital Federal. So if you're one of their customers and happen to wander in, please say thank you because they make all of this possible, which is just fabulous. So before we get rolling with our movie, we need to talk about the dessert part. Anybody eating or enjoying a dessert of note? Oh, Kay, what do you got? You may want to unmute yourself.
Well, I don't know that it's anything connected to what we've been watching, but it is a peanut butter cookie with chocolate chips.
Oh, yeah, that looks like
Yeah.
that's great.
Yummy,
And
yummy.
Nancy, what do you have? You need to unmute yourself.
Nancy, you need to unmute.
There you go. Oh.
Yes.
Still muted.
Still muted. You're still muted. Lower left corner. Try that. Or she's holding it up. We can all try to guess what it is.
Lady fingers? That's the only thing I could think of.
There we go.
There you go.
Yay.
Okay.
I had cataract surgery at the end of December, but I have to go back for a follow-up, so I can't see close up. But this is a lemon sponge cake that a friend gave me for my birthday, and it's a package of these that she bought at Brits. They're lemon frosting.
That sounds pretty darn
Delightful.
good. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
All right. Anyone else?
Anyone else? I'll
Oh,
chime in.
Sharon, what do you got?
because-
I think, look, Sharon, you're muted. Oh, you're muted, Sharon.
Sharon, can't hear you.
Lower left. There you go.
My husband bought me green tea mochi ice
Ooh.
cream.
Yeah,
Ooh,
I know he's a
excellent.
good man.
that is lovely.
Oh, and there's a good restaurant in town I discovered, but I'm probably 10 years behind everyone. Wine and Kitchen or something.
Wine
And
dive. Is that
Wine
it?
dive.
Yeah, that
I
was
didn't
good.
expect much out of anything called Wine Dive, but I had an absolutely luscious meal. And I wanted to say that I had a honey infused creme brulee with
Ooh.
fresh fruit on top. It was very good.
That
And
sounds
my
awesome.
friends had something that looked good too.
Perfect.
Good.
All right, Jack, are you ready to unveil yours?
All right. We have chocolate chip ice cookies that match my button.
And they're delicious.
Yes, they are.
And they're on the way. They're on the way out to Martha. They haven't gotten there yet, so she should get them in the morning. So our guest will have them as well.
Great, thank you.
All right, so Jack, you want to take it away and introduce Martha?
It'll be my pleasure. And what we'll do, at least initially, is we'll start with any questions in the chat as we usually do. So if you go down to the chat button and type in your questions, I'll try to field them. If we have time to open it up, we will do that as well at the end. So our guest this evening is Martha Wheelock. Over 40 years, Martha taught English, ethics, and women's studies in both high schools and colleges on both the East and West Coast. And toward the end of that teaching time, she ended up at Harvard Westlake School in Los Angeles, which is one of, if not the most prestigious high schools in Los Angeles. And I had the good fortune through my bride to meet Martha at that school. Martha has her bachelor's degree from Earlham College, her master's and doctorates from NYU. She also completed the AFI's directing workshop for women. And today she is a producer, writer, and filmmaker, and is the founder and CEO of the nonprofit Wild West Women Films. She's on the board of the National Women's History Project and Girls Learn International. She's a mentor at Girls Today, Women Tomorrow, and a member of the Alliance of Women Directors. So, and has won many more accolades than that, but so welcome to Retirement Boot Camp. Thank you for agreeing to join us, Martha. I know you have some prepared things to say, but I would like if you can take a moment and kind of tell us a bit of your story, how you came to this lifelong activism and ended up where you are, and the path that you ended up with, making films and continuing your activism in human rights and women's rights.
Well, glad to, Jack, and thank you for allowing me to be part of the dessert. And your boot camp. It's a great idea to keep us up to date and even to wed us back through our history of who we are. And as I was putting this together and looking into what's Kansas like, I'm from the outside, I see that many of us, and this is, we'll get to my career, but many of us have a germ of what path we're going to follow later on in life from the very beginning, and where our activism comes from, or at least where our values come from. And I was aware that when my father, who was a Latin and Greek professor, was forced to go and live in the country because nobody taught Latin and Greek anymore, that I had a cow and I was a member of the 4-H. And my cow was the best cow in the world, a Jersey cow. But the 4-H club wouldn't let me exhibit her because you had to stay overnight in the barn at the New York State Fair. And I was a girl and I couldn't do that. And all of a sudden that just really got to me. So I got my mother to stay overnight with me. And it was my first awakening that there was something different between Harry and me, that would happen. And that went on for quite a while. I legislated to be my class president at the prep school I went to. And basically, when I went to Earlham College, which is a Quaker college, there was a lot of really good values there, anti-war and pacifism, and I got involved with the anti-war movement very, very early, and so that sort of started it, and all these things kind of accumulate in one. And once I got married and found that I didn't like picking up his socks every day from the floor, and I was making as much money as he was, and he sometimes took some more days off than he should have. I went to a consciousness raising group, and that was in the early 70s, and got to talk and find my voice. And so that was the beginning of a lot of that. But in 1970, for the 50th anniversary of women getting the vote, I walked down Fifth Avenue with a sign that said, "I love my husband, I love my nights, but I also want my daily rights." So here I was, this little punk kid. Well, I wasn't a punk kid. I was in my late 20s with already this consciousness that kind of developed just from my day-to-day living. And I started an alternative school because grades were not important to some kids who were having trouble keeping grades. So we had a descriptive thing. And that's when I started my Susan B. Anthony Day, which got me involved with women's history, because we didn't have any women's history, in that time. And so the idea of all of studying this stuff that I brought up became very important to me. My last real push was when I wanted a topic for my PhD thesis, and I wanted to do it on a woman writer whom I'd met, a really great woman writer named May Sarton. And I was brought before a whole board of male advisors from New York University. There wasn't a single woman in that department at that time. And they said, "Oh no, Martha, you can't do it. Why don't you do Ernest Hemingway?" And I said, "Because Ernest Hemingway has been done and he doesn't interest me. I can't fall in love with him." "Well, then why don't you try William Carlos?" In other words, they kept giving me names. So I had to actually at one point say, "I can't do this anymore because you won't accept my standard of appreciating why a woman writer has a different challenge than a male writer. She follows a different icon, she follows a different language. And so from that, I started to make films about undersung women writers and women artists, because I wanted to be able to supply the new field, which was called women's studies at that point. And that became my first film company. And since then I haven't turned back. And then I, of course, fell in love with the suffrage movement. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Why was the suffrage movement such a education for all Americans and for all of us individuals? What can we learn from it? I think it's an important little idea to get out of that. And I worked on the Bella Abzug campaign and was arrested for 2 hours in my Vietnam War stuff. And my last pride and joy was that I worked in the civil rights movement, registering Black voters who were out in the boonies in Tougaloo County, Mississippi in 1964. So it was all this stuff kind of generated in me, so that now there's no turning back. I mean, I can't, and I work with my friend Zoe on the ERA campaign and obviously other things of that sort. So that's a long answer to to what it is that makes me who I am, I think.
That's terrific. That's terrific. I know that you prepared some information, interestingly enough, on Kansas as kind of an outsider's view of our history in this field. So if you're prepared to start with that, we can go on to that and then go from there to some questions. Will that work?
That's
Okay.
fine, thanks.
Great. Do you want me to pull it up?
And I
Martha?
have Kathleen. Kathleen's my driver.
Gotcha. I can do that. And there you go.
And this is not to be a PowerPoint of beauty. It's just to be so that we can remember it. And obviously you have a sunflower in your flag, and the sunflower was the major symbol for not only Kansas suffrage, but it was adopted by a lot of other states for their right to vote. So Kansas starts with a sunflower, and then other states copied it as a symbol. And every time I do a screening of my film Votes for Women, which some of you may have seen, I always use a sunflower, because that's it. So that's in your flag, and that's the beginning of this. Okay, next. So I was really interested in what makes Kansas kind of special and in a class by herself. And obviously, you know a lot about that's part of the Louisiana Purchase, and that both the two trails went through it as people went west. But what really inspired me was that if from the get-go was it had struggles, of course, as you know, but the abolitionists and the anti-slavery groups, John Brown, voted from the very beginning that Kansas be a free state. And so there you have, right from the beginning, a policy in your state that is of, anti-slavery and equality. Next.
Yep. Hang on. Sorry, I skipped one. There we go.
But this one is great. I don't know how many of you know this. I just love her. Her name is Mrs. Susanna Salter, and she was the first woman to be elected mayor of a town or city in the United States. And she was from Kansas. And in 1887, it was a small Quaker town called Argonia. I don't know if you know where it is and what's become of it, but look at her. She's just gorgeous. And it was a Quaker town. They already had a prohibition there. They started town square meetings. And this is a letter, this little quote here. Dear Madam, I write this letter to you feeling interested in the equality of man and woman. And as your state, Kansas, stands first to open the double door for a higher civilization to the whole world. First mayor was from Kansas. Cool, huh?
Very
Yep.
So when you go to Argonia, wherever it is, say, thank her for leading the first political position for women. Okay, next one. And then you probably know this. that Kansas was the first state to amend its constitution to prohibit alcoholic beverages. And it was the beginning of the temperance movement and the great axe-toting Carrie Nation. Now, we ask why this is important to know that from the beginning, prohibition was a real force in Kansas. Why was prohibition? Well, because when the men got their paychecks, they would go to the bars, they drink it up, and then the woman, the wife and the mother had no more money for food. And the women were living on, keeping the family together on a dime and a quarter. And so this was very important for women to not get beaten, for children to get fed. And so this was, and then I love the fact that prohibition is still in 29 counties in the state of Kansas are still dry counties. And so prohibition, by the way, becomes a very important movement in not only the suffrage movement, but later on in other movements in your state. So keep your eye on why it's important to acknowledge that you were the first state to prohibit alcoholic beverages. Are you in a dry state there in Lawrence? I bet not. No.
Absolutely not.
Well, here's to you. Next one. And there she is. And she began with Frances Willard to be the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And it was by the end of the 19th century, it was the largest group of women in the country belonged to this club. And it wasn't just for prohibition, it was for suffrage, and it was for different departments. They wanted pure milk laws, and they wanted all sorts of other things that were for the health of the family and the woman. And so when we think about the temperance union, Christian Temperance Union, we have to think also that it opened up a lot of issues that were day-to-day living in life for particularly the women's of Kansas and any women. But there she is, and of course you'll see later how the liquor business affects a lot of suffrage victories and whatnot. Okay, I love her. Isn't she cool? Don't mess with Carrie Nation. So this is just a kind of a reason why Kansas was the 7th state to win I'm from California, and we won the right to vote here for our California women in 1911, and then came Kansas. And you probably all know that women in the country didn't have the right to vote until 1920. So we're talking 8 and 9 years before all this happened. Well, Kansas in 1867 gave women the right to vote in school elections, and that was the first vote in our country. Wyoming won the right to vote in 1890, I think. No, 1870. So Kansas was before Wyoming. Then there was another election where they were granted the right to vote in schools and municipal elections. So here the women of Kansas are already practicing the right to vote. They're already know that they are some of the first in the country to vote. And that's really interesting. And so therefore they said, okay, now you let me vote in the school and you let me vote in the municipal elections, why not give me full right? And so the campaign was set up in 1910. It got through the Congress, the amendment to the Constitution, and then the election was held in November of 1912. And this organizing a big state with they didn't have TikToks or emails or anything like that. So this was they had to organize every county and figure out how they were going to do it. So I'm going to give you just a couple of examples. And if any of you watched the film I made on how California women won the vote, they learned a lot of lessons from the California people, because these have to be grassroots. These were not, people who could read lots of, heavy advice on how to get the vote. So next one. So this is a great picture from a newspaper, but these are just some of the images, how they dressed their cars up, how they had these mass meetings. They got women speakers from other groups. And of course, the Eastern people, Susan B. Anthony came out there and worked. And they got, I don't know if you know who Jane Addams is. She was the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. She established Hull House in Chicago and some of the settlement houses. She was a beautiful, wonderful woman who really, really endowed us with the fact that as Americans, we must care for everyone. And Dr. Anna Howard Shaw was both a doctor and a reverend, and she could go into a little old town and have 25 people in the, sitting around in the church parlor and talk for 2 hours and nobody left. Nobody left. Or she'd get up and ride on the back of an automobile and stop at little corners along the way, and people would come to see her. Probably they came to see the cars too, because cars were still a novelty in those days, and they would decorate them all up so the guys would come out and take a look at them, and then they got mesmerized by her. Unfortunately, there's no recordings of how she spoke, but the fact that people didn't leave after 2 hours of talking about women's right to vote, she must have had something going, and I don't think she bared her breasts doing it either. So, okay. So there's one of the great cars that they had to go to every county in Kansas and get somebody to head up all the meetings and the campaigns. It was a tremendous job, and they drove miles and miles and miles. And of course, there was no shelter from the 110-degree heat that you have there, or the 20 below zero winters. So all that was part of the organizing and the fundraising. Next. So this is what they did. And as we listen to what they knew that they had to educate people. Why should women be allowed to vote? They're supposed to stay at home and take care of the kids and cook my dinner. And I'm a big brawny man and I can take care of her. She doesn't really need it. And so they had to educate why it is that women should have the right to vote. And they vote on very different issues, as you well know. The woman had to be aware of whether the milk was pure, or whether there was any labor, the kids were being protected from any kind of danger. And they, of course, had to do handbills. They learned how to mimeograph and type up, because women could type a little, the literature. They stood on the street corners. They wanted the men to know why they had the right to vote, why they should vote, because who was going to allow the women to vote? The men were going to have to vote for the women to vote. So they were asking your husband, your sons, your nephews, your friends to do this. And this is what I love. They set up essay contests to, about why women should vote. They had debates between the schools. Well, what was all that about? It was educating people. And if you would look at nowadays, we need a lot more education on the issues. Here in California, we have these ballot initiatives that unless you know what's going on, you're not going to get the vote there. And they had to get the farmers, they had to tell the farmers why they needed to vote. What's going to happen to their land? What if they had all daughters, for example? They needed to be able to give that land to their daughters and not just to pass it on to Joe Blow, who lived next door. So, and then they gave prizes. I don't know what the prizes were, but they had plays. And the one thing I really got a kick out of us, I found that one of your Kansas girls started having fortune-telling booths at the fairs. And these guys would come up and say, "Tell my fortune." And of course she said, "Well, you will be rich and famous if you vote for women." And so, and they were always the young women. They were always, the men came to see, because women were still scarce in Kansas at that time. They weren't scarce, but they were not as many as equality. So they ran their campaign for about $30,000, which sounds nothing, I think. And they made baked goods the same way we do today. We had bake sales, and they instead of hiring somebody to work on their farm, they gave the money to the suffrage movement. They allowed the women to join for membership, and for I think it was like $2 for or $1 a year or something like that. But I love the fortune telling booths. I think we should start that, girls, up again. And so we have some, we can have some play there. So, okay, great. Next one. So fundraising and education, those were the watchwords. And there they go down the street, marching with their posts and marching with their signs, and how they got the store clerks to put flyers of when the vote was, and even the men, some of the men actually helped and would accompany the women, because they had to go down in the mines. They had to go into saloons, to not saloons because there was no prohibition, but they had to go into the meeting houses where the men were and try to educate them. I think that one report I read from a Kansas suffragist that she traveled 200 miles in 3 weeks to all these counties. Now that's a lot for a gal to be out in a car by herself or with her sisters. So okay, I love them. And look at this carload. They would go all over the state distributing their literature and getting on the back seat of their cars and just talking, because their hearts were full. Their arguments were very sound. And we could go into what they are, but we can discuss that later of what still needs to be fixed with all of that. Look at the sunflower on the tire on the back, and how they kept that word. Before the voters all the time, votes for women, votes for women, votes for women. So that's that. Okay, I love that picture. And then, of course, there was the backlash. The men who didn't want their wives to have, any vote. I'm going to take care of you, honey. Don't worry. I'm a good one. But here are 2 lines that when they got out into the country, the suffragists found that suffrage is worse than lukewarm here. The apathy of the women is something frightful. Why wouldn't women want their right to vote? Why do you think? They had to step out of their role. They were afraid they would be offensive to their husbands. All of that kind of thing, as well as they didn't have the confidence that they could make a decision. They didn't have they were so demeaned in so many ways that they just didn't feel that they had any rights to do that. So a lot of this was getting that women didn't want the vote. So what did the suffragists do? They went out to get votes from the women who did, and the organizations who did. And this is the 60,000 signatures they got. Now, just think about that. How do you get, that's a lot of signatures. They had to go talk to all the women that they get the signatures. And then, of course, the liquor. If women voted, they would vote for sure to have more prohibition. We don't want those women voting. I really hate those Carrie nations, so they were really, really indignant. They would go into recruit men. They would come in there and they would take them out of Kansas and give them some booze and take them back so that they would vote against suffrage. So the liquor industry was really, really mad. Okay, next one. There they are. They're talking to all of the girls. I just love these faces. I just called her head. She was a very prominent suffragist, and I think she looks like she probably is a Black or interracial, and that's to defy the comment that that the suffrage movement was a movement of all white women, and it wasn't. It certainly wasn't. And look at these cuties, aren't they? Look at them. Ernest, I just want the right to vote is what they're saying. And I don't know who all of them are, but Annie Diggs was the one that told fortunes. And then one of them had to get a patent for the size balloons that they wanted to sell at the fairs, because votes for women took up more room, and the balloons had to be 10 inches, I think it was. And she actually got a patent so she could have those balloons. Now think about that, those little ingenious kids, gals rather. Okay, next. And there they all are. It just says we want an amendment to the United States Constitution. And so there's two ways of getting to get a right passed in our country. One of them is state by state. So the states all give us the rights. And then, of course, the granddaddy of them all is to get it as an amendment. So every state, whether they like it or not, has to agree by the guidelines. And that's, of course, what we're fighting now, that many states have the ERA amendment, but not all states. And so that's why there's work about the ERA amendment as the 26th amendment. This is for the 19th amendment. Okay, next. I just love all their little faces, and there they are finally celebrating. And there's no booze, notice. It says Kansas must not say the Topeka reported women in every part making a heroic effort to cover the field thoroughly. They did house to house. They went to house. And when the election came, they felt that they had already been practicing voting. So here's how it was 16,000 votes different. And in Lawrence, every ward was carried with the exception of one in which there was a tie. So Lawrence, here's to Lawrence, right? And so they became the 7th state on November 5th, 1912, 8 years before the rest of our country. Okay, and don't you love them gals? And so this is a map of the states. Look at all the western states that allowed women to vote. They granted women the right to vote, and that would have been by 1912. And then the really black states would never, ever give, they had to have an amendment to give the southern states women the right to vote. So they said that in our state, we have no legalized saloons or any kind of place where liquor is sold. So we've been practicing prohibition. We kept them out of our battle, and we've had school suffrage and municipal suffrage. Thus, the women of Kansas were already voters and had only asked for promotion. And so when we see the accumulation of rights and history developing, it's no wonder. And this is yours is a unique story. This is a unique state story. And so hats off to you. Okay, next. I don't know what else I did here. Oh, this is so fun. And as I said today, it was the ERA that passed out of the Congress to become ratified by the states, 1972. 1923. Anyway, this is Daniel Anthony. Now, you've heard Anthony's name before, Susan B. Anthony. This happens to be her nephew. It's the son of her younger brother. And so Daniel Anthony, but guess where he was from? He was from Kansas. He was a representative from Kansas. And he worked with his brother, Senator Charles Curtis, also of Kansas. So if you want to blame Kansas for giving us the beginning of the ERA, then please do so. Look at that. There's Daniel Anthony, the senator representative that introduced the ERA, 1923. Hey, Daniel, good man. All right, next. Oh, do you know about this mural? This mural is in Norton. Anyone know where Norton, Kansas is? It is beautiful. And this is the raison d'etre. You can read all that. But once the 19th Amendment was ratified, Ida Walker was one of the 33 women nationwide elected to state legislation, and Kansas elected four women legislators, the second highest in the country in 1920. And she's featured in this mural, 14 feet high. I just love her. You have to look at it and maybe take a little side trip and go see Norton, Kansas. It's a beautiful one. It's on the next slide, Kathleen. And there it is. And this is a side of a whole building. It's a beautiful, and you can see Ida Walker at the end here. And then some of the other things, the map and justice and all of those things painted there. And they actually painted their what do you call it? The staging tool there too. But isn't that beautiful? It's huge. It's 78 feet long, I think it is, and whatnot. So make a little trip to Norton. Norton and the other town, which was where the first mayor was. Okay, next. Oh, and then God bless it. I mean, whatever you did there in Kansas in August 2nd, 2022. I mean, I and my sisters, we cried with this vote. I mean, it took courage, it took insight, it took education, I mean, God bless you. I guess you can tell my political leanings, but that's just, I don't know how many of you worked on this or are aware of it, but how important it was, how it brought hope back to us who had worked so long to get Roe v. Wade and to get all this going. And I've been working in the women's movement since I was in diapers probably. And so for this to happen was, it was just awesome. So thank you. I think I have one more. Oh yeah. Look at them. You know, you had that when you did photography in those days, you had to hold the pose for such a long time because they were very slow cameras and these big, you know, glass plates and stuff. So there they are. They're just so happy. And this Women's Journal was one of the women did a lot of journalism and press, and that's how they got their vote, and that's how they got their words out there. So that's my end of seeing that Kansas starts from the very beginning with anti-slavery, and it works toward giving women early votes in schools and municipals. It had a prohibition because it wanted to have a safe and sane and equal society. And then when it won the vote, it continued. Oh, the first mayor, let's not forget her. And all of these little inklings that 2022 was probably bound to happen. So, okay, now I'll take your questions and your comments and whatever else.
Okay, are there any, I don't see any questions in the chat. Do you have any questions or do you want to open it up? I don't, if you want to unmute yourself, that's fine. I'm terrible at figuring out who's where. And so we'll just let you unmute yourself and ask the questions and try to do it the best we can. Nancy?
I have several comments to Martha. You hooked me when you first mentioned May Sarton,
Oh, yeah.
and I started reading her poems and journals. I had
Yeah.
sort of a midlife crisis
Right,
around
right.
40, started reading her materials. You and I could be sisters, I think, because so much in common. And in fact, at the Lawrence Public Library, I just put a hold on her coming into 80 book.
Oh, great. Yay.
Before she died. And she is buried in Nelson, New Hampshire.
Yep.
And I hope to be there someday. My husband died in 2012, and I've been traveling as a house sitter and pet sitter throughout the United States over the
Oh,
last
wow.
8 years. And I love to drive, so I drive. And you wanted to know where Argonia, Kansas, is a hop, skip, and a jump from Wichita. It is still a thriving little town. And Norton, I plan to go there to see the mural.
Oh,
Love it. Daniel Anthony, when he presented that bill in Congress, Senator Charles Curtis was representing Kansas, and he
yeah.
went on to be the vice president of the United States. He's buried in Topeka. I was
Wow.
just at his gravesite last week because he was
Wow.
the first Native American to become vice president of the United States. And he was a member of the Kansas tribe here in
Wow.
Kansas. Also, Ida Walker, love
Yeah.
reading about her. And
Yeah.
I did not know about that mural, so I'll be going to Norton.
Oh, well, send me a
Diggs.
picture.
Yes, I will. And
Yeah,
you had
and I-
Annie
and I-
Diggs' photo. She was the state librarian of Kansas.
Yes, she
from-
was, yeah.
Yes, 1898 and on. And her husband was a postal clerk here in Lawrence, Kansas.
Huh.
And she also published the Kansas Liberal, of which, well, yes, we can talk politics later. But thank you,
Two of you
Well,
together.
for all
I'll-
that you've done.
Oh, well, thank you, Nancy. What a contribution to my life you just brought me. I will make sure that Jack can send out my YouTube channel where there's my wonderful, it's not because I made it, but it's a wonderful film about May Sarton called World of Light. And
I
it's
saw
on-
that.
Oh, it's
Yes.
on, okay, yeah. And that was made, instead of finishing my thesis, I did that film and it really changed my life.
We
And,
did,
Good
we
for
did connect
you.
everybody with the YouTube channel, but I will send that link out again when we send out the film of tonight's
Great.
episode.
And
And
then if
you'll
I
have
may
it.
ask Jack, if people would let me have their emails address, I'll just put them on my newsletter list and if they want them on there.
Anyone who would like to do that, you all have my email address. So if
That'd
you'll
be
send them to me, I'll forward them on to Martha.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Any other questions? Oh.
We moved to New Hampshire in 1995, and our daughter was going into her junior year. And we bought our house by the decision of actually where she wanted to go to high school.
Huh.
And the high school she was in was fairly liberal. But the other one that she didn't want to go to, they banned May Sarton's books.
Ooh.
And this is
Wow.
1995. I think because
Wow.
she was gay, but I'm not exactly sure, but I think that might have been the reason.
Yeah, probably. Or
yeah,
she was
but-
she's definitely was an independent woman and she,
Yeah.
she kept so many people alive through her journals and as Nancy just testified, I mean, because nobody would write those inner thoughts and it was all right to feel this way or that way. And she was like a wonderful, I'm so glad I got to spend so many years of my life writing about her and making this film. So, yeah. So what time, and she ended up retiring and leaving Nelson and going to York, Maine, which is on the coast and a wonderful town where I made most of the film for her. I had the great honor of taking care of her while she was suffering from breast cancer.
Oh, wow. And
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Altmans, have you been to Nelson, New Hampshire, where she is buried?
No, we had, I'm not even sure where it is.
Not yet.
Okay.
It's right near the McDowell Colony, which is an art
Oh,
center
yeah.
where, it's.
Yeah, I know
not
where
just
that
on
is.
There's not much of
Mhm.
Nelson, but there is that cemetery.
You're keen. Mhm.
I
Okay.
have a question.
Yes,
good.
Go for it.
Georgia.
I watched the film, but I don't think I know why the suffragette movement was in the West.
Oh, that's a great question. It started in the West. Wyoming was the first state to give
Yeah.
full suffrage. And then, Kansas. So it's because there were no women out here and the states would bribe the women saying, this is for my Wyoming, 1 in 10 people in Wyoming at that time was a woman. So they said, hey gals, come out here. We'll give you the right to vote. You can be the mayor. And, that was the first ploy. And then the second ploy is that if you could make it to the West and you were even from Ohio, you could make it out here on those incredible journeys that the people took overland. Then you were very often you were what was left of the family. You knew how to do a homestead. You were responsible for taking care of the kids. The guys had a lot of tasks for sure, but the heart of the family resided in the women, and so the men recognized this. In California, it was the ranchers and the farmers that said, no, my wife and my daughter work as hard as I do. They have the right to vote. So
Okay.
it was that. And then there was also these colonizations of women in what they call the women's clubs, the Federation of Women's Clubs, whether you were trying to save the Redwoods or whether it was the four women that were Armenian or whatever. But they bonded, they made little sororities, little clubs that gave them the courage to have a voice. And I think that all of that is very instrumental. And thanks for that question. Back east, they were still locked up in being, the proper woman and the cult of motherhood and the cult of the, the dignified woman who didn't want to march. But out here, we marched and we got in our cars and got dirty, and that's what it took.
Thanks.
So that was a great, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? We do have a comment about how much they enjoyed the films, and as I said, I will resend that link. I think Martha has 12 films on her YouTube, I believe.
Yeah, I have some more to upload, and I can, if you check it from time to time, I have a couple more. But that's where the real film called One Fine Day is on there.
So,
Celebration of the American woman from Sojourner Truth up to Geraldine Ferraro, who that means that it's out of date already because that's 1984. Those of you who are old enough to remember that, the first woman to run on a major political ticket for president or vice president.
so how are your films used? Are they used in schools as educational tools? Okay,
They're used in schools and libraries. And we
Yes.
had DVDs and even VHSs. And of course, we use them in, individuals use them, schools, libraries, public television. I think all of my films at one point have been on public television, whether it's national or whether it's local channels. I sold for $1.95 the rights to one of my films called California Women Win the Vote, which is a hoot. It's a really hoot because it talks about the state. And I got a letter from a young woman in Kentucky. It aired at 1 o'clock in the morning in Kentucky on a Wednesday night or Wednesday morning or something like that. And she said, now I'm going to go run for school board. and so you never know. You catch it. You catch these little side glances from people, and you never know how far these films, which are not blockbusters for sure, but they feed somebody's soul.
Yeah, no, they're really well done. Really
Thank
great.
you.
And that poster of California Women Vote was one of the most gorgeous Art Deco
Oh, was it?
kind of
Yeah.
images. It was just beautiful. And so
Right.
that led me to think that they had contact with artists
Uh-huh.
or were themselves artists or were able
Mhm.
to get in touch with lithographers and other people who would support them. It
Yeah.
wasn't just a mimeograph machine in a back room all the time. They really had some extraordinarily talented people working.
Right. And they did dances and plays. And
saw
the Great March of 1913 in Washington, D.C., which I refer to in the Inez Milholland film that I made, which is about the woman who died for our right to vote. I always say the suffrage martyr. They had pageantry. They
Right.
would they loved the arts. And
Right, and she was in I thought it was a little ironic that she was in a the people who
Joan of Arc.
the Knights of Malta going in and the Crusader outfit, and also that what she was billed for all the time was she was a good-looking babe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And
I thought that was interesting. You can use that stereotype for your own benefit, which certainly what's her name with the glasses and the long hair. I'm exhausted. I had 2 hours.
Gloria Steinem.
Gloria Steinem
Right.
well knew that it wasn't going to be Abzug that was going to be getting all the attention.
Right.
It was going to be she and a
Yeah.
couple of other.
Well, sex and cars, I guess, huh? They brought the cars and they brought the
Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
I
And-
thought that
and-
was
and-
extraordinary because not very many women had drivers. In fact, some driver's licenses didn't
Right.
come until later. But I thought that that was pretty extraordinary to see them driving
Yeah,
and
yeah.
owning cars. I had the feeling that a lot of these women were rather wealthy.
I would say, well off, not the top crest, but like upper middle class, maybe the ones that had the cars. But then they got out here in the West, we had college students, women who went to college. And it was a real boon for them because they would get to, stand on the street corners and sell their postcards for a nickel. And the guys would drive up and buy from them,
And even
and
then, the
Inez used her
idea,
beauty they kept advertising her as the most beautiful suffragist so that people would come see her, come to her speech.
and the fact that women were going to college here was a rare thing.
Yeah.
Many
Yeah.
of the women who were in agriculture had to stay and help on the farm, or
Mhm.
they went to normal colleges where they learned to teach.
Yeah.
And these
Any
were,
other, I'm sorry. Any other questions? Because I don't want to get too close to the end without anybody having a chance. I do have one
Yes?
question.
Oh, Sorry,
I'm sorry.
I was trying to
Amy.
Go
type.
ahead. Go ahead.
Whoa.
Okay.
Uh-oh. You okay?
A minute,
Did
it
you
wasn't
fall?
working. Can you say your question?
What are the challenges of bringing history to film?
I was trying to type and it wasn't working.
Uh,
So, yeah, the
in
challenges. of
one
bringing
sentence,
history to film.
I think all film takes a shortcut to history because by nature of the medium, and you have to interpret it a little, but you have to try to also keep it as close to the truth as possible, for sure. And I think that film does a lot by bringing in the music, by bringing in the art background and whatnot that you don't necessarily get in a history book. So you have a lot more context for the story, because you've got the visual and the audio and things like that. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, and that relates to the ERA. So we have the ERA in 1972,
Mm-hmm.
passes. We didn't get enough states. It had
Mhm.
two, I think 3 extensions, if I remember correctly. That goes beyond the extension. Virginia votes beyond the extension. And at this point, is there a legal route to make it effective? Or is it a Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we all have to start over again, kind of her opinion at this
Yeah.
point? Is there actually a legal route?
Well,
Without-
supposedly that what they're arguing now is that all the states have ratified that are necessary for ratification.
Right.
It's just not been published by the archivist because that came under Bill Barr, who was told by 45 that he should not allow this to be published, and so it's on hold. But the thing that they're getting them on is that the deadline was in the preamble or in the instructions for the amendment. It was not part of the amendment. And so they're
Okay.
trying to argue that. And what the bill is now before the House and before the Senate, I think it's first all in the Senate because Schumer has brought it to, is to eliminate the deadline
Okay.
because of that fact. And if they get that passed through Congress and the deadline's eliminated, then it's all's cool. And then there's another rule in the Constitution that once a state has approved of an amendment, it cannot rescind, because that was the other danger. They were said,
Right.
supposedly some of the states said, well, now we don't want to amend it now. We don't want to ratify it now, but they can't do that. And so there's a lot of state by state work that still has to be done in terms of pressuring the right people to vote for the elimination of the extension. And I would probably hope that it gets through in the next few years, within the next few years.
Okay.
100 years is a long time to put something up all the time, to keep working on it. I mean, I'm tired.
Well,
So thank you all for being here. I really enjoyed this.
Oh,
yeah,
thank you.
you.
That was wonderful.
You can go ahead and unmute and applaud. Martha, thank you very much.
Thank
If,
you.
for any further questions for Martha or anything you'd like to access, please let me know. I'll pass it on. If you'd like to be
Yeah.
on our mailing list, of course, that would be by permission. So if you want to, I will pass that on as well. It'd be my pleasure to do that. And I'll just do my obligation that next week we do have Gray Anatomy. So if you haven't signed up for that, please join us for that event. And if there aren't any further questions, then we'll see you at the next Retirement Boot Camp event. Thanks very
Great.
much, everybody,
Thank
for coming.
you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Kathleen. Good